23 textile and garment companies employ the next highest. With such other manufacturing sectors as printing, chemicals, and toys, U.S. investment totaled more than 6 billion Hong Kong dollars, with 142 firms employing more than 39,000 people. In the electronics sector, there are 88 vendors vying for a piece of the Hong Kong action. And in 1986, things weren't too good for the industry.
Well, I think in '86, everybody jumped on the electronic bandwagon of producing telephones and the things that people were buying or looking to buy in '85. And as a result, our electronics industries went down the drain. But the smart money was in the electronics area producing parts for the computer giants. Those companies are prospering. Many of those companies are members of the chamber and tell us that they're increasing their business only because they moved into high tech.
Now, in our case, we have a unique advantage in that we can tie into our competitors' environment better than they can, which will facilitate our being able to grow at the expense of the rest of the industry. But it is not going to be a good year for the industry.
While the electronics industry is going through a flat stage, the textile and apparel trade is going the other way.
The apparel industry, by and large, have had one of the best years they have had. In my case, it's the best year in 25 years.
U.S. investment in the textile and apparel industry account for about 500 million Hong Kong dollars in 1985. Most of the U.S. firms were only exporters of garments and apparels.
The American firms that set up here don't necessarily set up production factories. They set up trading companies. They set up exporting and importing companies. And as I said, those are service-oriented operations. Those investments will continue to expand.
By contracting garment factories to produce their goods, U.S. trading firms keep more than 5,000 workers busy. But even if all the factories keep humming in 1987, there's always that nagging headache coming out of Washington, D.C. to worry about.
We know for a fact that come the reconvening of the Congress, the first trade bills out will be protectionist trade bills.
And because of presidential politics in Washington, things could get a lot worse.
This year, because of the Iran mess, the president has lost a lot of his clout. And I think that the Jenkins, Jesse Helms, Strom Thurmond group are aware of that. And I think that they're anticipating an easier ride-through of a protectionist bill.
Protectionist sentiments in the United States will always plague the Hong Kong textile and apparel industry. Some analysts have this solution.
They will try to be more sophisticated in terms of quality, design, and overall sophistication of their product. And if they do that successfully to that extent, they will be able to beat protectionism.
And Ira Kay says there's another way to beat protectionism.
Hong Kong, as an entity within itself, has to start a Buy American campaign. I think we've got to get the cotton spinners and the wool spinners to go into the States and buy their cotton and wool from the United States this trip, even though they may have to pay 6% more.
Ira Kay also says that Hong Kong factories buy $1.5 billion of raw materials for garment making, and of that, only 2% is bought from the U.S. Buying from American suppliers, he reasoned, could stop the protectionists from complaining. But in Hong Kong and in Washington, D.C., the apparel dealers aren't alone in their fight against protectionist legislation.
The interface has been more in Washington than here. However, through the various shippers groups and shippers councils, we have had ongoing dialogue about the various lines, particularly the U.S. flag carriers' efforts to curtail this legislation or curtail these legislative efforts in Washington, D.C.
But U.S. protectionists have in turn lobbied in Hong Kong, and some people say that protectionism against all Hong Kong products is just beginning.
I think these bills that are in Congress will not exclude all of the other items produced in Hong Kong and the Far East. It'll be all-encompassing and cover everything, not only textiles and apparel.
To my knowledge, okay, there are not
the kind of electronic products leaving Hong Kong to the U.S. market that the U.S. is concerned about. There is some strong protectionist sentiment in the U.S. relative to Japan, okay, and things may really happen relative to Japanese exports, particularly in the area of semiconductors and high technology components. But I don't think Hong Kong has got to concern itself with that kind of a threat.
No one knows if U.S. protectionism in electronics will shift from Japan to Hong Kong. But there's one thing for sure, protectionist threats won't really stop American investors from coming to Hong Kong, and a lot are moving into the service sector. We'll look at that area in part 2 of Focus.
Is there anybody in Geneva's office?
This may look like another busy office in the Central District of Hong Kong, but it isn't. On an average day, 150 million US dollars worth of business pass through these telephone lines.
Silver and platinum orders, huh?
This is gold bullion trading at one of the highest levels in Hong Kong. Playing with big stakes isn't something new for the financial house of Shershin and Lehman Brothers. That firm is all part of the growing service industry in Hong Kong. Executive recruiter and AmCham president Paul Cheng explains.
Service industry loans, that our banks are involved in, and the service industry will make up another $2 to $2.5 billion. So it's substantial.
Another substantial figure was the almost $3 billion US dollars attached to a well-known shipping group. That's how much it owes, and that figure was the debt needed to be restructured. One American financial house got the action to do just that.
The role we play is we take a look at the company and we try to identify what assets and what businesses are worth saving. And then we do a fairly extensive study of the activities of these groups.